Hey everyone, and welcome to the Volture Podcast YouTube channel. If you're just tuning in with us, definitely hit that subscribe button, maybe give the video a like too. We're always doing these deep dives into tech, innovation, all the trends shaping what's coming next.
And yeah, welcome back to our regulars. Today, we've got a really interesting one. We're digging into, well, the growing rivalry between Huawei and Nvidia, specifically in the AI chip space. It's heating up.
It really is, and we've pulled together quite a mix of sources for this. We've got Daily AI, O Cafezinho, CNN Brazil, some pretty insightful stuff from Reddit of stocks, actually. Plus Techmundo, 360 News, and TV Alagoas.
So our mission today, really, is to unpack this competition. We want to look at how these U.S. sanctions have kind of changed the game and what it means, that Huawei is stepping up as a serious competitor for the future of AI. We'll try to keep it clear, understandable, without getting totally lost in the super technical weeds.
Okay, let's jump right in then. The big thing kicking this off seems to be the U.S. export restrictions on Nvidia. It feels like these rules basically paved the way for Huawei, especially in China.
That's exactly right. The U.S. government restricted exports of Nvidia's top-tier chips to China, and that created this, significant gap. Suddenly, Chinese companies doing heavy AI work couldn't easily get their hands on Nvidia's best stuff.
And Huawei was just waiting in the wings, right, with their Ascend series. I keep seeing the Ascend 910B mentioned as the alternative to Nvidia's A100.
Precisely. Huawei actually laid the groundwork for this quite a while ago, back in 2018, with the first Ascend 910. That was their move towards having a whole AI package, a full-stack portfolio, as they call it. Chips, software, the whole deal. The 910B is the newer version, and yeah, the word is it has comparable raw power to the A100. Although, the general feeling is its overall performance, like in real-world tasks, might still be a little behind NVIDIA's A100.
Okay, but a little behind might be perfectly fine if the top NVIDIA chips are basically off limits or way harder to get. And we're seeing companies make that choice, aren't we? Baidu, for instance.
Yeah, that Baidu order is a big signal. They reportedly ordered 1,600 of these Ascend 910 Billy B chips. That's over $61 million now. Okay, perspective.
Yeah.
That's still way less than what NVIDIA used to sell in China. But
it's a major player making a significant bet on Huawei.
Exactly. It shows that big AI companies like Baidu are putting serious money down on a non-NVIDIA option. That signals a potential shift, a real change coming.
Yeah, and it makes sense. The Daily AI piece mentioned other big Chinese tech firms like Alibaba, Tencent. They're probably looking hard at Huawei too, especially as their current NVIDIA gear gets older or hits capacity. You need options when your main supply gets squeezed.
Absolutely. And it's not just talk. Look at iFlyTech. They're actively working with Huawei on hardware using the Ascend 910B. Their CEO actually went on record saying this new Huawei GPU is, and I quote, basically the same as the A100 from NVIDIA.
Wow, okay. Basically the same. That's quite the statement from another major AI company. So how do they really stack up performance-wise? There was some unofficial comparison floating around.
Yeah, Daily AI mentioned that. An unofficial comparison popped up on X, putting the Ascend 910B against the A100. We don't have the detailed benchmark charts here, but the fact people are even doing these direct comparisons shows how closely Huawei is being watched now.
Oh, and that comparison apparently pegged the Ascend 910B's price at around $38,000.
$38,000. Okay, so still a serious piece of kit. And the whole market there is huge, right? Didn't Daily AI say analysts estimate the Chinese AI chip market is worth something like $7 billion?
Yep, $7 billion. That's a massive incentive for Huawei to capture as much of that as possible. It explains why they're pushing so hard.
Right. Now let's circle back to those U.S. sanctions. The idea behind them, according to Daily AI, was mainly defense concerns, right? Stopping chips going into Chinese military tech and maybe slowing down their overall AI progress. That was the rationale, yes. Prevent military use, slow down innovation, standard strategic goals. But like often happens with these broad sanctions,
unintended consequences.
Exactly. It looks like they might actually be speeding up China's drive for self-sufficiency in AI chips. Kind of a paradoxical effect. Trying to limit them actually fuels their push to become independent.
Like a boomerang. And Huawei specifically has been in the crosshairs for a while. They're on that Commerce Department blacklist.
Oh, absolutely. They're not just caught in the crossfire, they've been a direct target. And their reaction has been pretty dramatic. They've had to scramble, find new suppliers, double down on designing their own stuff. Remember the Kirin 9000 chip back in 2021?
Yeah, that was a big deal. The first 5-nanometer chip, right? Super advanced for the time.
Exactly. Showed they could still innovate even under pressure. And that whole situation also forced them to switch their manufacturing, didn't it? From TSMC in Taiwan.
To TSMC, China's own chip maker. Which, okay, maybe isn't quite at TSMC's level yet, but they're catching up fast, apparently.
Correct. The trade restrictions basically meant they had to use domestic manufacturing. And yeah, while SMIC might be a generation or so behind TSMC technically, having huge customers like Huawei pushing them is definitely accelerating their progress.
So sanctions create a problem. Huawei responds by getting stronger internally, design, manufacturing, the whole chain. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. This CloudMatrix 384 supernode. That sounds like Huawei throwing down the gauntlet directly at Nvidia on the infrastructure side.
It really does. They unveiled it at their Cloud Ecosystem Conference. The whole point of the CloudMatrix 384 is to tackle the big problems you run into when training these massive AI models. It's positioned squarely against Nvidia's NVL72 system. Think of it as Huawei's answer for building the large-scale, independent AI factories of the future.
And what's special about it? It connects a lot of processors really efficiently.
Yeah, that's the core idea. It links up 384 processing units using some kind of high-speed interconnect. A tight communication is vital when you're throwing enormous data sets at these huge language models. You need everything talking to each other super fast.
And the performance numbers sound big. Up to 300 petaflops. How does that compare?
Well, NVIDIA's NVL72 is estimated somewhere around 180 petaflops. So on paper at least, Huawei is claiming a pretty significant jump in raw compute power with the CloudMatrix. They're also talking up improvements in bandwidth and memory, which again are critical for these giant AI models.
It feels like they're not just aiming to match NVIDIA, but maybe leapfrog them in some areas of this large-scale infrastructure. There was a quote from a Huawei exec about building an independent foundation.
Yes, Zhang Ping'an, he's an executive director and the CEO of Huawei Cloud Computing. He stressed their commitment to an AI computing foundation that's independent, secure, and reliable. That language, independent, secure, reliable, really hits home their strategic goal. Self-reliance.
And this isn't just a blueprint, right? Ocafazinho mentioned it's already running in one of their data centers and going global soon.
That's right. It's apparently operational in their Wuhu data center now, and they're planning a global rollout by the end of the first half of 2025. That's a pretty aggressive timeline. Shows they're confident and serious about competing everywhere.
This CloudMatrix news really puts the whole US-China tech competition into perspective, doesn't it? It's moved beyond just selling chips. Now it's about who builds the fundamental infrastructure for the entire AI revolution.
Totally. And the demand for this kind of computing power is just exploding because of large language models. So the stakes are incredibly high. The US, with Nvidia, Google, OpenAI, they've had a clear lead in chips and architectures. But China is pouring resources into catching up, and Huawei is really leading that charge.
Especially Huawei, because they've already felt the sting of the sanctions. They have more motivation than anyone, perhaps.
You could definitely argue that. Their experience has absolutely acted as a catalyst. They have to develop their own stuff. And this whole tech race, as the sources point out, isn't just about technology. It's tied up with national security, digital sovereignty, the global strategic balance. Building things like the CloudMatrix 384 is a massive step towards that independent AI capability for China, running their own algorithms, processing their own data, all autonomously.
Okay, so what's NVIDIA saying about all this? How are they reacting? It was interesting that their own reports now list Huawei as a competitor.
Yeah, that's quite telling. For the second year running, NVIDIA's annual report explicitly names Huawei as a competitor. And not just in one area, they list them across chips, cloud services, computing, and networking products. 4 out of 5 key categories. That's a big change from just a few years ago when Huawei wasn't even on their competitor list.
And NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, he acknowledged it too, right? Said Huawei and others in China are vigorous and competitive.
He did. He acknowledged a fair amount of competition in China and called Huawei and others quite vigorous and very, very competitive. You don't usually hear market leaders talk quite like that unless the challenge feels real.
It's fascinating, though, because despite all this and the sanctions hitting their high-end chip sales in China, NVIDIA's overall numbers for 2024 were still huge. Over 860 billion yuan in revenue. Massive growth.
Yeah, it's kind of a paradox. Their overall revenue surged, up 22% year over year, their fastest growth since 2016. That shows just how dominant they are globally, outside of the specific restrictions in China.
But the CNN Brazil report highlighted that the China-specific business did take a hit from those export rules.
That's the key distinction. Overall amazing growth, but their data center revenue specifically from China dropped significantly after the October 2022 rules kicked in. Their CFO even said China is now only a mid-single-digit percentage of their data center revenue, and they expect it to stay that way.
So the sanctions are carving out that space in the Chinese market, limiting Nvidia's growth there, which is exactly the opening Huawei needs.
Precisely. And remember, Huawei has also been making waves elsewhere. That Mate 60 Pro smartphone comeback was huge news.
Right. Showing off advanced chips, almost 5G speeds despite everything. And then the Mate 70 with their own HarmonyOS NXT operating system.
It all points to this broader push for technological independence across the board for Huawei. They're showing resilience.
And Nvidia seems genuinely worried about more restrictions, don't they? That it could lock them out even further.
Their annual report basically says that, they express concern that tighter U.S. export controls could stop them selling even their current products, block development of replacements, and effectively shut them out of China, and maybe other places like the Middle East too. It really highlights that tension between national security goals and the business realities for these big U.S. tech companies.
Okay, let's tap into the hive mind a bit. What were people saying on that Reddit source stocks thread? Any interesting takes?
Oh yeah, Reddit always has opinions. A lot of users echoed what we've been discussing, this idea that the sanctions might have backfired a bit, actually pushing Chinese companies, especially Huawei, to innovate faster. Necessity being the mother of invention kind of thing.
Makes sense. Anything else stand out?
Well, there was a lot of respect for Huawei's telecom gear. People saying it's top-notch, very competitive globally, sometimes even better or cheaper than competitors, despite the political heat.
That's interesting. Their reputation in telecom is strong, even if the chip story is newer.
Definitely. And some users worried that the U.S. policies, being maybe unpredictable, could push even allies to look at Chinese tech, just to diversify and not be solely reliant on U.S. suppliers long-term.
That's a potential ripple effect for sure. What about China's domestic market?
That came up too. People pointed out China's huge internal market is a major advantage, something the old Soviet Union never had. It gives companies like Huawei a massive base to sell into, even if international markets get tougher.
And Huawei's ability to just get things done, mobilize resources.
Yeah, people commented on that unique mix in China, state support when needed, but also fierce capitalist competition driving innovation. How Huawei seems to leverage that really effectively.
Did anyone mention the mood inside China?
The idea that sanctions might actually rally support for Huawei domestically, like us against the world, boosting their standing as a national champion.
Interesting. Any more technical points?
One user speculated, and just speculation, that maybe the U.S. is only restricting chips where Huawei already has something decent coming online, kind of lessening the impact. And someone mentioned DeepSeek, that Chinese AI model is apparently running on Huawei infrastructure.
So a real-world use case popping up.
Exactly. Shows their ecosystem is starting to gain traction. Oh, and there was one user really down on Nvidia, felt they'd abandoned gamers for AI profits, and inevitably someone asked if it's maybe time to, invest in Huawei, given all this momentum.
Always the investment angle on our stocks. Okay, so bringing it back to the CloudMatrix 384. It's being tested internally now, right? With DeepSeek potentially being one of the first users.
That's the latest, yeah. Huawei's working with a company called Silicon Flow in their Woohoo labs, putting the CloudMatrix through its paces. And supporting DeepSeek R1, known for training language models efficiently, seems like a likely first big application. There was even that semi-analysis report suggesting one of Huawei's newer chips, the Ascend 910C, might individually beat Nvidia's upcoming GB200 on some metrics.
Whoa, okay. That's a bold claim, even if it's just on specific tasks. Things are moving fast.
Very fast. That comparison really underscores how dynamic this hardware race is becoming.
All right, so let's try and wrap this up. The big takeaway seems to be Huawei is definitely stepping up as a major competitor to Nvidia in AI chips. Partly because U.S. sanctions open the door in China, but it's also clearly driven by Huawei's own tech progress, the Ascend chips, this new CloudMatrix 384 supercomputer thing.
Right. And those U.S. restrictions aimed at slowing China down might actually be having the opposite effect in some ways, pushing them faster towards self-reliance in this absolutely critical technology. The whole situation has massive implications, way beyond just these two companies.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, what does this mean? Well, maybe more competition leads to more innovation, maybe even more affordable AI tech down the road. It definitely shows how tangled up tech development is with global politics these days.
Which leads us to that final thought, something for you all to chew on. As China pushes harder and harder for this technological independence in AI, a field that's going to shape everything, how is that going to change the global power dynamic? How does it reshape innovation itself? Definitely keep an eye on this ongoing AI war, the hardware developments, the US-China tech relationship. It's going to be fascinating and incredibly important.